Awesome. And last but not least, Luke.
Hey everybody, my name is Luke Elliott. I am at Brown-Forman, which is in a similar industry to Rosa, but we are on the spirit side of things. So our brands, we've got a lot of them, but you've probably heard of Jack Daniel's. That's our biggest one, and then lots of other fun brands like Woodford Reserve and Finlandia Vodka, Tequila Herradura, Humidor Tequila. Lots of fun stuff. My role is responsibility for what's called it says IMC on the list, but that's Integrated Marketing Communications, and my area is specifically around digital intelligence. So it's information we get from online data sources. It tends to be lots of different things, and some of these the other panelists have already mentioned. But for us, what we have social and social listening as one part of an overall digital intelligence mix. But it's basically how can we use different online indicators to understand what's going on in the world. And a primary use case for Synthesio has been around understanding the context of something that we might identify in one of the other areas. So for example, we might see a spike in search volume for a new cocktail. And so then we want to understand what's potentially driving that. Synthesio can often provide the context and the deeper dive to understand what are all of the different associated things that would answer the why. Oftentimes when we're doing analyses, everybody always says, okay, that's the what, now where's the why? And Synthesio can really help with the why. I think another thing that's come up with thinking about how Synthesio it fits into the overall mix is also it's hard to sometimes have sort of a broad, loosely targeted thing. So if you can go at it with a specific question, that kind of tends to help. So and that's kind of the way it fits into our overall mix. That said, I'm sure we're going to, especially when we talk about AI a little bit later, we can talk about how that can help for identifying the unknowns, which is something that we're definitely interested in.
Perfect. So this is a great setup for what we want to dig into, but let me just summarize a couple themes, because already I've heard some common interests, common areas. Things that we'll explore a bit more is, the notion of social being part of a broader digital intelligence program, right? We know that's the case, especially, as we talk to our friends at Ipsos, right? For people who hopefully know, Synthesio is part of the Ipsos family. We spend a lot of time with really smart market researchers around the world, and increasingly we're targeting those insights and market research roles, and they think of social as just another source. So there's sort of the role of social in this broader digital universe, which is super important. And then there's the sort of mashing up of all different types of sources of information to really understand markets or audiences or products and things like that. And I think we'll dig into all of that, but let's start at the beginning, which is a good place to start. How do we get, and what tips can we share with the audience on how do you get started with this type of sort of multifaceted social intelligence program? Maybe, what's key to getting buy-in, ultimately getting budget, no tools, right? So I know that each of you have been through this process. Maybe what you've learned, right, in terms of the best ways to get started, and maybe things that you've discovered over the years you've been doing this that, oh, if I only would have known this, and fill in blank. But maybe let's go back on, start with you, John, because of the diversity of sort of what you're working on. Maybe share a few sort of top tips for how you got started, and maybe one thing that you wish you knew then that you know now. And then we'll go around the virtual room here and have everybody else chime in. So this is, if you're listening, this is where I'd get your pen ready, because I suspect, especially if you're at the beginning of your journey, you can learn from this crew in terms of what they've learned, or the mistakes even that they've made. So what do you think, John? What would be your top tip, and what do you wish that you knew back then that you know now?
Oh, the pressure now if everyone's sitting there with their pens ready. So I think that the first thing is, and this sounds really simple, but it's just be organized and take your time to gather the information and the requirements from your peers within your business. So quite often what we do with technology is we will do interviews with stakeholders to understand, do you know that we have this type of technology or data that can answer these questions, and then just identify, do people know what's available, yes or no? And then you can, through those interview processes, you can identify as well what the gaps are in terms of technology. And I remember when I started at Shell, I went through this auditing phase, and I think we had something like 14 tools that kind of did elements of social listening, but didn't quite do social listening, but were costing us quite a bit of money. So one of the first things I did was to build out a kind of a features and capabilities map of all of these tools, and then say, look, if you've got this one tool in place, the social listening tool in, you can meet many of these requirements and these capabilities. And then you can take that, you can take the information from the interviews in terms of what people actually need within the business, and then you can turn that into a business case that you can then share with senior leaders as well, who you then need to get the buy-in from. And it's really important to get that buy-in. You may need to do a one-off pilot as well, just to showcase this is what you could potentially be doing with social listening data, so that they can see it. I think that that's also another learning, is that in order to land these things, people have to see it to believe it. You can keep talking about these things till the cows can come home, but unless people actually can put it into context and can think about how does this apply to me, that it may fall on deaf ears. So getting that senior leadership buy-in is also really important. I think when you're getting set up, case studies, keep driving that adoption, sharing those case studies, be honest about the limitations as well of listening data, but how it complements other data sources, so that it then shows the value of where the listening data fits in. I think if I could go back and change something now, it would be to not assume people knew as much as, say, we did around analytics. We really were starting from the ground up in terms of coaching people right on the basics, in terms of what to mention, for example, what's the data that listening tools can actually bring in. It's quite scary when you just have to really lay it out in layman's terms, so that people really understand what is this data, how can it be used, and then hopefully you'll be able to drive adoption through all of that knowledge sharing. So that's what I'd go back now. I'd make sure that there was a lot more training materials ready for people who are just getting started.
I mean, what's interesting is we're still educating, right? I mean, social listening as a discipline has been around at least 15 years, if not more. It's as old as the social channels, but still we're educating. And then, as we'll talk later, as we start to broaden to other data sources and even get into what Forrester's coined as AI-enabled consumer intelligence, which we love that as a sort of umbrella term. Now we're back to educating. It's sort of like people just got what social listening is, and now we're changing the definition, but mostly for the right reason, because it means more sources, more ways to deliver the insights more broadly. What about you, Luke? What would you, how much of that rang true, and what would you change, I guess, if you could go back in time, or maybe other top tips for people getting started?
Yeah, so mine was my experience was a little bit different than John's, because I had kind of inherited a social program, and then I was trying to fit that into an overall digital intelligence mix. And I think one of the things that was kind of similar is you don't want to overpromise what it can do. And I think that that's something that, especially in the early days of social intelligence, a lot of the press was kind of bad about this. It's like, it will replace all of your research, and we have to be careful with AI-enabled consumer research, not going down that same path, because then what that did was, especially if you had a lot of people who were kind of doing quote unquote traditional research, is it kind of put their guard up, and those were the people you need to be your advocates. These are the people we actually want to use this to complement the work that they're already doing. And I think that that's been kind of just a big thing that we've always kind of kept in mind, is like you've got to honor those advocates along the way. You don't want to actually, shoot yourself in the foot, sorry to use a colloquialism there. And I think the other thing that when we talk about adoption is just determining who are your actual end users. Are you talking about analysts? Are you talking about brand managers? Are you talking about someone else? Each of those people, they're going to be using this in different ways. So one of the design principles that we've kind of put in place with our social intelligence work in particular is we try to focus on click to analyze instead of type to analyze. And so that means on the back end, we do lots of structure work to make it, and Synthesio is set up to really nicely do this with the way that topics can be created, so that people they never have to see this giant Boolean query on the back end and get intimidated by it. Because that's the first thing that's going to make someone check out if they see that. But if all they see is a word for a brand, okay, cool, I can select that word and compare it to another one, and kind of just this avoiding the type to analyze, focus on click to analyze. That's been something that's really helped with making sure that we just get people more comfortable, and we're focused on that comfort all the time.
Who else? Because I think these are some great points, but I'm sure there's some nuance here as well. I mean, this simplified, this is such an important point that as you broaden the audience for these insights, you can't assume that they know anything about how they were gathered, what the tool does. We hear a lot, right? We had a team at IIEX in Austin, Texas, the Green Book event, and so many people were talking about sort of taking these insights and how can I turn it into something that's more consumable by more people. You know, help us create even just like visualizations. They were describing what we heard early on in business intelligence, but they didn't really sort of live through that. So it's always been about taking data that maybe was created by sort of the experts and democratizing it so that the masses could consume it, but also get exactly what they needed. So I think this notion of click to analyze is really a good one. What about you, Rosa? What else could you add to the mix, or what would you have changed based on what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting question because flipping on its head, I think for me these days, selling in a social intelligence program in theory is actually not that hard. Like, stakeholders understand broadly there's data out there that we can access fairly easily and cheaply, and in principle they get that you should be able to get something valuable out of that data. In many ways it's a bit of a table stake, right? You're not going to get a competitive edge with data because everyone has the same data, but that doesn't mean you don't need it. Nobody wants to be kind of willfully ignoring it. But I think what the guys have touched on, which is really crucial for me, is you have to sell it in the right way and with the right expectations. Because one watch out that we faced is the things that we've seen people get really excited about, the use cases that people are excited about before you've launched it, have turned out to be the things that actually it's a bit imperfect at delivering. You know, I've seen tools sold on the premise that it was gonna, yeah, like you said, Luke, replace all our global brand tracking. Spoiler alert, it did not. Or that they were going to be able to audit all of their local markets campaign compliance. And actually in alcohol, where a lot of content is age gated, it cannot do that. So I think, yeah, being really realistic about what are your actual use cases and what can it deliver is really crucial, because as well as yeah, ticking off your potential advocates on the insight side, as Luke said, you're also just really going to lose buy-in very quickly from marketers who thought this was going to solve all their problems, and then it turns out not to. So yeah, being realistic with that I think is key. I think being honest about the brand size is something we really hit up against. I think when you're talking about this, some marketers have a really optimistic picture of how many people are talking about their brands online. They think, oh great, I'm going to be able to listen in to people talking about my beer. And then the sad reality is when they open it up, most of the mentions they have are their own posts. So I think that was quite key for us in really framing what are you going to get out of this, and yeah, being honest about the limitations, not over promising, is absolutely key. To that end, putting the work in to get the data quality there is absolutely critical. There is absolutely no point launching, got some cool stats, and then someone says, oh no, but that doesn't make any sense. And when you dig into it, it's because there's some flaw in what you put together. So you've really got to put in the structural work. And then yeah, to touch on something one of the guys said, get your case studies early, right? Your little wins. Anytime you deliver some value, some useful insight, brilliant. Make a case study out of it. Early on, we had some great success using the Profiler tool to identify a potential partner for one of our craft beer brands, which has turned into a massive success. So we are still banging on about that 2 years later, because it's a really concrete example and it helps people understand, okay, cool, that's how I can use this, and that's how this program is delivering value to the business. So as well as selling it in the first place, it helps you recommission it year on year.